Welcome to our fifth Ask Why session, titled Why Does Education Still Matter? The New Disruptors, Basic and Higher Education. We have three distinguished panelists joining us today. His Excellency Nguyen Vu Tung, Ambassador of Vietnam to the Republic of Korea. Her Excellency Sripriya Ranganathan, Ambassador of India to the Republic of Korea, and Faye Sahai, Managing Director at Vinaj Ventures, to discuss why education may still be the answer to some of the most pressing challenges of our times, and how we may improve the system where it's failing our students. The panel discussion will touch upon a range of questions, including, but not limited to, the role of education, the gap between traditional institutions of learning and the skills demanded in the job force, effects of COVID on education, and what role technology can play to move us forward. The cohort moderators who will be leading today's organic conversations are Hwa Pyung Yoo, co-founder of Enspire. He's Korean in Paris, and he is also pursuing his bachelor's degree in cognitive behavioral neuroscience and political science at Villanova University. Jasmine Park, a master's student at Seoul National University, and Gabriela Mayte Souza Pinedo, a bachelor's candidate in informatics at Yuan Ze University. I call her a Peruvian in Taiwan. We also have some of our global colleagues joining us from Texas and the Philippines. Welcome, colleagues. And Ambassador Tung, if you don't mind, would you like to open the discussion with a few minutes of opening remarks, please?
Thank you, Yvonne. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yes. Thank you so much for invitation for me to join the Ask Why activity. I think it is really making me so joyful and happy because for me, as an educator in background, I always feel happy seeing younger people. The question designed to me whether the education is still matters. I think the answer is obvious. Of course, education matters because it's the most important thing for people, especially at the young age and in the formative years. So we cannot think of any person who is successful without going through schools, even though we can take the founder of Microsoft as an example. He actually is not successful in college, but he is very successful in life. But I think he's like the exception rather than the rules, and it doesn't mean that he stopped studying. He learns a lot, and education in that sense is understood in a very broad way. So in short, the answer to the question whether education still matters is obvious. Of course, education is something we have to be going through our life. If we put into broader context and the contemporary context, I think the answer is more affirmative. First of all, we have so many areas that need education, even further education. Just look at how technology and science progress these days. We have so many new areas of expertise. We have so many new things to learn, and I don't think that the unconventional way of learning things is effective. We have to go to schools. We have to go through the official, well-established educational institutions and programs. And we also see the trend that college and university education is becoming a must, and more people now are even looking forward to having even higher level of educations. Just look at the bio. I mean the bio or political. Computer science, for example, even master's degree is now the lowest level, right? And then people are still looking even for higher degrees than masters. Secondly, if we put it even in the East Asian context, where families are rather more than ready and happy to invest in the children's education, and they are willing to accept sacrifices in order to put their children to schools and colleges. And I think that is the cultural aspect, and it is still very alive in this part of the world. And I think elsewhere people are happy to send their children to universities. Lastly, I think when the world is so open these days, especially with the help of the internet and international travels, studying overseas is also another trend. And I think that going to universities is important, but more importantly, people have more chances to go abroad to studies. And I think that it is a very good and healthy phenomenon, because we can have more diverse cultural, academic, and social context to interact with students from other parts of the world. And I think many of us sitting here in this webinar are actually overseas, not in his or her own homeland context. So in total, I think education still matters, and even more important for all of us. Then we are not really asking ourselves whether education still matters. Then we have to answer a plethora of questions: how it is important, and education in what sense, and more importantly, I think when everybody is thinking that education is important, then we have to ask the very basic questions. That includes, one, who are able to join the educational programs, who can go to schools, who can go to universities, especially for the people with less resources. That number one. Number two is what is the new way of studying? We agree that we must go through educational processes, but what are the most effective means of studying these days? Whether going to university is the best option, or going to college is fine, or even going to vocational training is even more promising than going to colleges. We know that many graduates from universities are still finding difficulty in terms of employment opportunities, while the graduates from professional and vocational training institutions are making more money than university graduates, and it is really a fact of life. Then we also want to know what kind of knowledge that we have to be equipped for ourselves. For example, there are so many new areas of expertise that we need to study, but even at the college level, we cannot learn everything. We have to learn how to learn new things independently. And I think that in this perspective, if we know how to be self-studying, that would be even better than we have to spend most of our time in universities to be told what to learn, and after the graduation without the guidance of professors, we are at a loss. And going for other educational programs, joining more colleges or universities seems to be the answer for many people who I think seems to lack the ability to be independent and self-study. And if we open our discussion into the areas of who can be going to universities, who can go to higher educations, and that would lead us to a broader debates or discussions, and that has so many things related to public policies. The governments, the states have to be in the position to provide educational opportunities for all, and the question of equality is also can be discussed, because the importance is there, but not so many people can enjoy the opportunities to go to universities, either because they have less resources or less connected, or they are in the areas that have few universities, access to universities and college. So I think this is a very good cut for us to connect to broader issues, politically, socially, financially, legally. And I think that I welcome the possibility of our forum to invite all of us to think more serious issues rather than education. And even though education by itself is very important, but we can link education with other issues, and I think that we would have a more comprehensive perspective on that. And at the end of the day, the decisions would be made by the officials, the decision makers at the state and provincial levels, and the decision with regard to education is of course made by ourselves in the broader context. So I think I would stop here and wait for the discussions that follow. And of course, I would be very happy to hear the opinions from the fellow panelists. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Ambassador Tung, for the very thorough remark. And then now we'll move on to the Indian Ambassador, Her Excellency Sripriya Ranganathan. Ambassador, would you please give us a very short introductory remark?
Thank you so much. Very, very good afternoon to all of you. Very good afternoon to my dear friend, the Vietnamese ambassador, and to you, Yvonne. It's good to see many of the people on screen whose bio profiles and thoughts I was able to read a few weeks ago, and I was really very impressed to find in the set of applications that I looked at the very sharp focus on issues that are I think very, very relevant to all of us around the world, whichever country, whichever part of the globe we may come from. But I think areas of kind of commonality which spanned almost all the applications that I saw where on issues like gender, like environment, climate change, sustainable development, mental health. And I think these are really, it's very encouraging to see that young people are focusing so sharply on these issues, which touch all of us around the world, regardless of what we may be doing in our respective lives. And I thank you, Yvonne, for inviting me for this session, which I think that to me the idea that education really holds the key to the future for all of us around the world is a kind of a mantra, a kind of an axiom for the way in which I have led my life. What we have seen in back home where I come from in India is that education really holds the key to so much for all of us in terms of what we look at in the future. And I see this. I'll just cite two examples to illustrate this understanding. All of us around this, I think in this room today, are reasonably privileged in the sense that we have access to resources, we have access to education. But what I have seen in the course of the 25 odd years that I have spent in diplomacy is that education can really be the means for those who are less privileged to jump up to a different level of being in a way. And I have seen in India that there are people who are very economically underprivileged, who are perhaps have not had the kind of resources that we have taken for granted, that they are able to offer this to their children, and they're able to therefore have this hope that the lives of the children will be better than theirs has been. So I see education as really offering this hope for the future, and I have also seen that those who have been able to access education, they have really been able to broaden their horizons significantly. So not only in terms of hope, but also in terms of being able to achieve their potential. And I think education has really been this magical talisman in a way. And that brings me to the second point that I wish to make, which is that if we look at the horizon of human civilization over the past 1,000 years, 2,000 years, it has really been education which has enabled us to move from where we were at the dawn of human societies, when we were largely agricultural, maybe not even agricultural, it was more tribal hunter-gatherer kind of societies, to more industrialized societies, to where we are today, where we have any number of societies which are oriented around services and definitely more stable, more rooted in one place than it used to be. And at the same time, what we have seen over the past, and I would say past 30 odd years, very, very sharply, that the kind of integration that has been possible between people living in different parts of the world, because of education, because of technology, because of the connections that technology has enabled, is that we've been able to share thoughts, share ideas, share information, and this has enabled us to reach a very different stage of human civilization. And we are seeing the impact of that in terms of through technology, through education, we are able to see far more sharing of ideas, sharing of thoughts, sharing of information, and this has had the kind of impact that we can see in very, very tangible terms, not only in broadening minds in terms of making us more receptive, making us more willing to see the value of other ways of life, the value of different strategies to one goal. And at the same time, this has been very, very tangible in terms of empowerment. And I think that is really where I see the value of education for us, that it allows us to go beyond what we are familiar with, what we are comfortable with, to looking at what is happening in other parts of the world and in a way striving for incorporating those ideas and thoughts into our own circles of comfort and being, to strive for something more and something different and perhaps something better. So I will stop here. I was supposed to speak for 3 minutes. I've spoken for 6, but I hope that you will forgive me for that. And I look forward to the conversation ahead. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and I cannot believe that you've actually timed yourself. But thank you. And as we have Ms. Faye Sahai joining us, thank you so much for making the time. We're so happy to have you.
Well, it's an honor to be here with wonderful guest speakers and yourself. And I'm calling in from San Francisco, so it might be a little darker when you see out my windows there. But I so resonated with the thoughts of our previous ambassadors from that. I've said to my children who are in their 20s, the best gift I can give you as a parent is the gift of education. And in my thought, I'm a venture capitalist. I focused in healthcare, education, and where we're going. And I really think that all of us, no matter our age, are lifelong students, that we're going to continue to learn and grow. As we've done studies about people's health and longevity, we know that if you have that sense of learning new skills, you keep your brain awake and aware and fresh from that. You keep your kind of spirit of growing, your sense of purpose and meaning growing as well. So I just think it's such an opportune time to really look at education. I think during COVID, it really made us question and look at the possibilities of how we educate our students, how our professors teach, how we can cascade that even wider and farther from that. But definitely agree that it's a real opportunity to share our thoughts and ideas and information in this area. So excited to be here as well.
Thank you so much. And now I'll hand over the mic to our core moderators, Hwa, Jasmine, and Mayte. Here you go. Take over the organic conversation that you wish for.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. First of all, I want to welcome our three distinguished guests. Thank you for joining us today. It's a great honor to have you. And I would like to know, how would you like to be addressed? Ambassador Vu Tung, is it okay, Vu Tung?
You can skip the word Vu, just call me Ambassador Tung.
Ambassador Tung, thank you. What about Ambassador Ranganathan, is it okay?
That's okay. If it's easier, Ambassador Sripriya is fine too.
Okay, thank you. And what about Faye Sahai? Miss Sahai, is it okay?
That is fine.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Sahai. So in today's session, we are going to talk about why does education still matter? And given that we are also fortunate to have given the opportunity to have access to a good quality of education, let us remember what Nelson Mandela once said: education is the most powerful weapon which we can use to change the world. In this session, we want to address the inequalities of education, the role of education, its shortcomings, how COVID has exacerbated them, and how technology can help us to move forward into a more sustainable educational system. This is an open conversation. Feel free to jump into the conversation whenever you feel like there is something that resonates with you. And before we deep diving into this conversation, we would like to start with Ms. Sahai. Would you like to share with us any kind of experience or insight regarding how your education has shaped you and has opened opportunity for you? And was there any time when you felt like your education was not enough, or when you didn't meet any kind of qualification?
Thank you so much from that. So I've been educated in the United States, Canada, and Europe. From that background. Oops, and apologize if you can still hear. But most of my education has been in the United States. So I did study here in the US and then studied abroad in Europe from that standpoint as well. I really felt, both for undergraduate and the master's degree, for me, I have a love of learning. And even now, as I'm in my later years and I'm close to retirement, I just applied to school again to get another degree, because I feel there's so much to continue to learn and grow from that. From my education, it was not only the information, the books, the lectures, the professors, but my fellow classmates that I learned from and their experience, the opportunities, the connections, the network that helped me in my career. So I feel very honored and privileged with that. What I've been focusing on in this latter stage of my career is how can I help others? And we've been looking at various startups and the venture capital community, investments on how can we invest more in our education. And as you're mentioning about COVID, we've really seen how important it is for us to meet in person for our mental health, for that sense of learning. But we also saw that we can do some of it remotely, and that there are possibilities to engage remotely, where you might have had some teachers and professors only available to the very elite schools, now available massive online free programs. One of the most popular courses at Yale on happiness, the course on happiness, is now available free online for anyone in the world to take. So we see that there are some opportunities that technology can really help education spread and scale and be more accessible. But we really need to address the digital divide, where some people do not have high bandwidth, do not have the laptops or access to computers that allows them to leverage technology to its fullest extent.
Asking what sort of educational program you applied to? Is it like a master's or?
Oh, yeah. So I do have a master's in business administration that I had taken a few decades ago. So now I just applied to Stanford's Distinguished Careers Institute. With that, it is for professionals that are kind of looking to what is their next phase and really giving back to the community. And it's a year-long program where we really explore what ways can we connect, give back in a meaningful way. So that's the program I applied to. Thank you for the question.
It's super interesting.
Yeah, and it's been a long time since I had to write student application essays. So I admire and respect all the students here because it's been a while. So. Any other questions or thoughts? I'll turn it over to the moderator.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sahai. So you were also talking about the inequalities.
Sorry, Mayte. I have to skip from the section for about 10 minutes for an important call. Is it okay?
It's okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank
Sorry.
you. So Ms. Sahai was talking about the inequalities, about the internet infrastructure. For example, in Peru, I feel like there is no good quality of internet infrastructure. So there are a lot of remote places that they don't really have access to internet. And like she said, I think we need to improve a lot in developed countries. Shanuz, do you have any thoughts about the infrastructure, the accessibility of education in your home country?
Hi, thank you, Mayte, for the question. So when you talk about my country, is the education system is divided into different social class. For example, the elites that have the private schools, their children will go to private schools and they have a very good education. And those private schools produce enlightened, liberal, and democratic human beings. But on the other hand, we have government schools, which is for middle class or poor citizens, I must say. And then we have the madrasa system, where I must say that the madrasa system produce religious and conservative children. So, you know, there is a clash between these two extremes, these two poles, like where we have these liberals and open-minded students, but on the other hand, we have this conservative and religious group of people. So there's a clash of ideas. And so I think, like, in this way, it's not possible for a society to go in a more harmonized way. And secondly, there is this textbook controversies, where, you know, as we are Islamic Democratic Republic of Pakistan, and so in our curriculum we include Islamiyat. It's the Muslim religious book, and so we undermine the minority religions. And even in the Islamiyat there is a specific sect, and we highlighted that. And I think that in education system there must be harmony, so that every individual and every citizen should get the equal opportunity to take part in the education system. So when I talk about the accessibility, obviously, like in Pakistan we have a class difference, like it's really huge. So a rich is very rich, but a poor is like below the belt. And so the rich, obviously, they are from private school. They go to private schools and they have very good internet connection. They live in capitals and they live in other large cities. So it's not a problem for them. But on the other hand, the government schools and for madrasas, so we even don't have the technology. Like, people even don't have the smartphones. So it's really impossible. Like during COVID times, there was really impossible for them to get the instructions from their teachers, because they don't have good technology like mobile phone or television or radio. And then even the madrasa system, they were locked inside their religious schools. I mean, it was impossible for them to go out, because they were far from their homes, and it was impossible for them to go back to their homes, and they were locked. And then, as they don't have internet and they don't have technology, so it was, even the instructors were unable to teach them. So these were some of the problems that people in my country face, and the education inequality still exists in 21st century. Thank you.
So as Shanuz mentioned, I guess inequality can happen based off of a class and based off of different belief ideals that politicians or people with political beliefs have. And I think one of the reasons there's a huge disparity in class is also due to the regional disparity. If I understand correctly, in many countries, they go through difficulties based off of a regional disparity. So I wanted to hear maybe some experience from like how regional disparity can like possibly made some inequality in education. Because for example, for Ambassador Ranganathan, sorry if I pronounced it wrong, I realized that you had the symposium about developmental dynamics and future trajectories for specific regions such as Jammu, Kashmir, and Laka. Is it correct? Sorry.
Ladakh.
Yes. So there, I think you talked about how educating girls and protecting girls is important. And if I understand correctly, India is also going through regional disparity. And I assume there could be different status of education occurring across the regions. So first, I would like to ask that questions to Ambassador Ranganathan, and other people can join in and share the experience that they had about like regional disparity and possibly also, inequality that females or, girls face in the area of education.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. I am very impressed to see that you've done your homework before this session and you actually know about stuff that I've said and done over the past many months. But I was very struck by what Shahnuz just mentioned, and I think she really hit the nail on the head when she said that through education, the capacity for societies to move in a direction of liberal, progressive, modern thinking and ethos is so pronounced. And really, that is what I see when I talk about the capacity of education to transform. And I think that capacity is not restricted just to the individual, but to that entire community from which he or she comes. And I would take again as an example, before I come to your precise question, Jasmine, I'd just like to take a cue from what Shanu said. And I take as an example a very, very dramatic and I would say transformational step that was taken a few months ago. And I'm talking about my own country, of course, but I'm sure that there are similar examples from around the world. And that transformative step was the decision to allow women to join the Indian Armed Forces in all capacities. I mean, it was there earlier in a limited sense that you could join as an officer, you could join for short durations, but a recent decision that was taken was that Indian women could join across all ranks. And I say this is transformative because when you see a woman who is able to contribute and who is empowered in a very tangible, visible sense, I think that sends signals across their entire community to which she belongs, that women are not lacking in capacity, women are not weak, women have the capacity to work, on equal terms with the men in their society, and the impact of this can really go beyond that role or that community. And I would say in a very, very similar sense, when you have an educated woman as part of a very conservative community, and we have any number of such communities in India, where women are regarded as weak, women are regarded as a segment of population that has to be protected, a segment of population which has to, in a way, seek permission from the men in their community in order to do whatever they wish to do. I mean, these are still very, very, very strongly held views in many communities in India. So, and I see this education as being the only means for us to change this mindset and this thinking, and enable the women in the society to really do whatever it is that they believe is their strength. That could be in the field of art, that could be in the field of science, that could be in the field of teaching, that could be in the field of outer space, whatever be that field, whatever is that strength of that woman, being able to tap that potential is what is really the change that we hope to achieve. And to answer your question, Jasmine, very directly, I think there are very large communities in India. There are wide disparities between the urban centers, for example, and the rural communities. What we see in some of the more egalitarian societies in India and the more traditional conservative societies in India, there's a huge disparities within our country. We are seeking now to bridge those gaps and make it possible for women across the country to have access first of all, and to make the most of that access to really strive to achieve their potential. And I think where you're able to make a change in the women folk in a community, you can really have transformative changes for the next generation, because and I hold this view very strongly that when the women in the household are educated, that entire the household, it becomes more liberal, it becomes more progressive, because they are able to see, the women are able to have a voice, and that is what we really need to give to our less educated, less privileged communities, that we give a voice to those who are not as empowered as the others. And that is what we are now seeking to do in the more I won't say backward, but certainly the less privileged parts of the country, where this access to education, access to economic opportunities, and therefore access to liberal and progressive ethos has been restricted, that we are able to bring all this to them in a very, very tangible sense. And that's what we are seeking to do in Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, what we are seeking to do in the less progressive communities in, for example, Rajasthan, in the Northeast, and I would say even in many of our communities down south, where we are more advanced economically, but perhaps still quite, we still have a very long way to go in societal terms. So I hope that partially answers your question.
I just wanted to add, I wholeheartedly agree with your focus on education and how that can uplift the next generation, and how we look at equality in so many senses, whether class, religion, gender, urban, rural, and we look at overall. I think it is so important, especially in this time as we proceed forward.
Yes, thank you for the answer. And before I ask Nazifa about the question, because I noticed that she raised her hand, I just wanted to ask like one more follow-up questions to Ambassador Ranganathan about like, maybe can you give us some example of like how these educational empowerment program looks like for, it can be for women or it can be for a specific like region or class. I just wanted to hear how like, the initiatives that have been done. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Again, India is a huge country, so there is a lot of how should I say, diversity, and also different stages of development in different parts of the country. We also have a federal system, so there are a lot of divergences in terms of the practice and the methodology that has been adopted by one part of the country and another part of the country. But just since you mentioned as an example, if I take the case of what is being done in, I'll give you two examples, in fact. What we have tried to do in the state of recent developments in the state of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh is to increase the availability of higher educational opportunities for the people of the state. And this includes in the area of medicine, in the area of engineering, in the area of nursing, so that really the capacity of the young people of the state to have access to high class scientific education has been scaled up very significantly in the past couple of years. Another example is I'd like to take the example in my state. I come from the state of Tamil Nadu. In fact, let me not do that. Let me take the example of Madhya Pradesh, which is one of the states in central India, where there has been very, how should I say, a strong focus on education over the years. This is not new, but what we have been seeing is that there has been a kind of a gap between education and the utilization of that education. So we've been trying to see where are we falling short? Where is it that our children who are graduating from the schools and are moving on to the universities, but are finding that that education is not really in tune with what the market is looking for. And here there is a very exciting connection that we are finding with Korea, that a very small India-Korea startup which has been focused on education. They have now provided a service, and that service has been picked up by the primary and secondary school system in Madhya Pradesh, where technology is being used to allow the teachers to understand how much the kids are understanding. So the capacity for the teachers to see at the end of the school session how much the children have actually understood from what has been imparted, and the capacity for the administrators, the school level administrators, to understand how the schools in different parts of the state are faring in terms of the children actually understanding what has been taught, rather than just relying on the end of year exams to capture the understanding and to take that forward. So I think these are the kind of measures that are being taken. We are also finding that the private sector has stepped up to the plate to a very great extent. So we have the IT education service providers, which are in a way providing post-school leaving education, and these are hooking in very well with the conventional higher educational programs. And I hope that we will find in the years to come that these plug and play kind of programs that are being now offered will enable the Indian kids who are graduating from schools and universities to have very market friendly skills, which allow them to see allow families to see the very tangible value of education. So it's not just the shaping of minds and the shaping of thinking, but also the capacity of kids who are educated to to be able to contribute to the Indian economy and to the world economy in a very tangible sense, and to be able to show to their families that education, that input and that investment in education is reaping rich dividends in terms of their capacity to contribute to the families and economies. So these are the kind of changes that we are seeing now in the country, that I hope will strengthen, these trends will strengthen in time and become more long lasting in the years to come. Thank you.
I just wanted to add to that as well. We're definitely seeing more private and public partnerships in education, as well as more investments, innovation, different approaches in technology. We've definitely been seeing a lot of online application and resources that have personal education plans for students. So you may be a student that really excels in math, so that teacher can offer you some additional resources in math, versus someone else might be struggling in English, so they can give some additional resources, rather than giving all the same material to all kids, no matter what their level are. So we're definitely seeing some ways that allow for a little bit more personalization and access. And with the increased public and private partnerships, what we're seeing is, companies, private companies coming in and offering like career days. This is what we're seeing, for the kids to be exposed to how they can apply those skills, the why of that. So instead of just learning math for math's sake, having engineers say, well, when I learned math, then I could be able to calculate how to build this building, how to build this software, how to, and being able to see the value and the application of that skill set, that then can become shadow career days, internships. And as we look at education and the ongoing nature of it too, I think as we see the value of it and its application, because when we've been looking at equality, what we've also noticed is there's not been as many girls studying science, technology, engineering, and math. And there's been some successful experiments and works in universities and schools to say, why is that so? And it was approaching it in a little bit a different way, showing the why of it, how it could be applicable, showing the creativity in it. So it's not just the pure coding of it, but the how and the why from that. It made it more accessible and then more equitable for people to think it's approachable from that standpoint. So there's been some great experiments on that. One thing I do want to mention, just given COVID and what we've been really focused on, and one of the ambassadors was talking about the overall education and beyond, is we really need to look at education and the tie to mental health. What we found now is the students in school are now the loneliest generation with higher anxiety and depression, given COVID has disrupted their education. So I think we not only have to think about the education as far as the lessons, but also the students' feelings and how they feel about their education and where they can go from that, and kind of balance their overall health as well as their education. Because we know when a student's well-fed, well-rested, not stressed, they can actually learn and absorb more from that they'll be able to retain that they will be able to have the growth mindset and the openness from that. So that is just one thing to consider as well.
I just wanted to jump in one more time because this was a thought that was sparked off by what Ms. Sahai just shared. If I could just have 2 more minutes. One, this whole impact of COVID in terms of one, bridging the digital divide, but at the same time, accentuating the disparity in access. And this is something that we have perceived very sharply in India. Because while I won't say the very rich, but certainly those who are at a reasonable level of economic independence, those kids have been able to, in a way, benefit in some ways from the COVID, outbreak and the kind of restrictions that it has imposed on education, because they still have the internet, they still have the computers, they still have the access to something even as basic as power supply, so that they are able to continue their education. But at the same time, there are a very large number of other less privileged children who have really been cut off from education for a very long time, or who were cut off for a very long time from education because they just did not have access to smartphones and devices. And I think one very, very encouraging sign that we are seeing, at least in India, is that almost all the states have understood that this kind of restrictions is something which they have to deal with in the long term. And again, I'm just coming back again to Ladakh, since you mentioned it, Jasmine. One of the initiatives that has been taken by the state government of Ladakh is to provide laptops to almost at least all the secondary and higher secondary children, so that their access to education is not interrupted, or at least the interruptions are minimized to the extent possible. But this is something where, as you can understand, a country like India, where a country of 1.3 billion people, the number of children who are in schools is very huge. We have about 400 million kids who are still at school going age. So for us to run an initiative in which, if not every child, at least every household has access to technology, it's a hugely expensive and a hugely challenging enterprise. And this is where we are looking forward to private sector, public sector collaboration, so that civil society comes forward. We are seeing a lot of, philanthropists who are coming forward to try and bridge this gap. We are nowhere near achieving what our goal is, but at least we are making incremental progress. The second aspect, and here again, I'm happy to report that we are at a slightly different stage than what I've heard from friends in the Western world. Strangely enough, the percentage of women in STEM in India is overwhelmingly large. We do not have that kind of big gap that I hear from my European friends and my American friends is a reality. And I think this is perhaps a consequence of the kind of societal predisposition where women are encouraged to be in more jobs which are more stable, which are more office oriented, and therefore families, even conservative families, encourage their daughters to to pursue careers in banking, to pursue careers in engineering, because the perception is that these are jobs which are more secure, where the work-life balance can be better. And perhaps this is the reason why we do not have that kind of big gap in of women in STEM that I think many of the Western world suffers from. So these were just two very quick inputs that I wanted to offer. Thank you.
Thank you so much for great insights and great comment. I want to ask Nazifa if she has something to share about the topic.
Hi, yes, Jasmine. So I felt it would be appropriate to jump in right now to sort of present the scenario in Bangladesh. So much of what Ambassador Ranganathan mentioned is quite relevant to the scenario, to the scene that exists in Bangladesh right now. So I was quite surprised to see the literacy rate, the most recent data which I found for 2019. So the male to female ratio, the difference is not that high. So for the male ratio, it was 80%. And for the female population, it was 78.9%. So I was quite surprised to see what an amazing progress Bangladesh was making in sort of bridging the gap in gender inequality when it came to education. But from my own perspective, I did feel that access to tertiary education specifically is not equitable across genders and income groups as well, because females and students from poor families are more at a disadvantage. And I also pulled out some statistics, and I found that it did happen. It just so happens that the female share of enrollment in tertiary educations were quite low in Bangladesh. It was about 38%. So the gender inequality that still persists in tertiary education sector still needs to be addressed in much of South Asia, I believe. And another issue that I have experienced is that the teaching and learning assessment systems in Bangladesh, they're quite rigid, and they're designed in a way that impedes effective student learning, which I feel is the reason why students are not prepared for the outside world, for taking on employment and all. So as someone who has received my undergrad degree from an international institution, which is designed according to a liberal arts curriculum, I feel like the whole exposure as a science student that I got from courses that dealt with humanities and social sciences, I felt that improved my critical thinking a lot, and that helped me, that prepared me as a global citizen. And I just wanted to ask Ambassador Ranganathan and Ms. Sahai, to what extent do you think that a liberal arts curriculum in the tertiary education sector would be addressing a lot of the issues that you mentioned in helping students prepare themselves for the outside world when they step in?
Yes, thanks for sharing the situation in Bangladesh, and I think you share very good insights that we can connect our next topic to. But I think Natasha also wanted to talk about the overview of Sri Lanka, so maybe we can hand it over to Natasha and move on to new topic.
Yes, hello. So I think in Sri Lanka, we have quite a high literacy rate as well, and also free education. But then despite that, as far as regional disparity goes, I think there is a huge disparity between the different regions. There are popular schools that are in cities, and then there are other schools that really sparsely get resources and other things. And when it comes to teachers as well. And I think the way that Sri Lanka has kind of realized and has kind of tried to build up for this is by the quota system. That's what I wanted to highlight. So for example, when it comes to university admission, the regions that are kind of at a disadvantage, they would have lower cut marks for admission to university. But then I think what I feel is that that's more to kind of take care of the statistics and the numbers, but does not really solve the root problems that are the lack of resources and teachers and other things. So I think that's what I wanted to highlight about Sri Lanka. And I could empathize with what Ambassador Ranganathan said as well, because I think India and Sri Lanka are kind of similar as well in their approach to education. And we do have, when it comes to gender, there is definitely an increase of women admission to universities. But then, according to the Global Gender Index, we have quite we are on the lower end. So I think that also shows how education should not just be, just like giving the opportunity for education, like that, just like it shouldn't stop there, but we should have a more holistic view on how education should be formed, especially in terms of curriculum, which I think also leads back to this whole idea of like mismatched curriculum when it comes to these days, the curriculum and the labor market that we have today, especially when we are talking about like sustainability. I think we'll be talking about it in the next topics. So yeah, that's what I wanted to kind of give an overview on. So thank you.
Thank you, Natasha. I think it is a great point that we can talk about for the next one, as in terms of like educational curriculum or educational system. So I think like based on country by country, we have different educational system or different, educational initiatives. So this is an open question for all Ask Why fellows. So I wanted to ask, have you ever experienced frustrations or any maybe shortcomings in the system of the education that you experienced? And if you did, what do you normally do? Is there a mechanism you can possibly, voice out or vocalize the frustration that you had in, current educational system? Or, is it normally, just talk it over with your friends and it doesn't really become somewhat, related to policy making, or that can actually relate back to society? I just wanted to ask why cohorts' personal experience and their frustration or their experience in educational system. Anyone who wants to jump in?
I think I might jump in on this one. It's okay. So first of all, hello, my name is Dylan. I'm based in Sydney, Australia, and dialing in from the lands of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the First Nations people who look after this land, the traditional owners. And I think that's quite important because even at a lot of significant events in Australia and in universities and things, a lot of First Nations perspectives and knowledges are ignored and not really integrated into the curriculum. And I think Australia here, we felt that quite acutely, especially with the recent bushfires. I think, was it 2020 or 2021, around that time? And we were looking at how, kind of reflectively looking at how a lot of these tragedies and climate change crises could have been avoided or minimized by listening to people who have been here for thousands of years and have an intimate knowledge of the land and preventative strategies for that. So in response to your question, Jasmine, on frustrations with the curricula, I think for me, the main frustration was probably the lack of cultural diversity in the curricula. So not only from First Nations perspectives, but even just like basic language studies. In Australia, the dominant language is English, and that's recognized. But at the same time, we have hundreds of languages from First Nations peoples and also from culturally and linguistically diverse communities, which are slowly disappearing. So like I think about my personal context as Chinese Australian with Teochew and Malay and Cantonese heritage, but then I don't speak a word of Teochew at all. And then at home we use English, and it's kind of like it's hard enough trying to learn a language, like A, and then B, not being surrounded in that environment, like where you have to use it on a daily basis and you do get that practice. So to be kind of as a double whammy to like not learn that language and to have English suddenly as like I think the word is like lingua franca or something, like the language which is somehow used across the whole world. But in a way, it's almost like subsuming or eating up other languages. And I think that really has a lot of ramifications, because languages, in my opinion, is kind of the core of who we are as people and how we understand ourselves and how we understand other people. And, you know, we've talked a lot from the other ambassadors here today and from Ms. Sahai about the intersections between education and other global issues like inequality, climate change, and like even just diplomacy and things. So when you take away language, when you take away education in the very tool which you can use to, as Ambassador Tung mentioned, like learning how to learn new things. But if you don't have the language proficiency to learn new things or to go in another direction, how are you supposed to do that? So yeah, I think maybe as like a stepping stone for this discussion, maybe having a think about like beyond kind of beyond general topics, like, or beyond learning about engineering or learning about maths or learning about and beyond a lot of the discussion that we've talked about in terms of access to technology, which is definitely important. But what other tools or what other skills do students need today, which are essential for their learning and for connecting to the world? That's my 2 cents.
Can I jump into the discussion here? Yeah, I'm back. Actually, it was a very urgent call. You can see how the life of a diplomat is. Very many chances for unexpected things to happen. Now, back to the discussion. I really highly evaluate the point raised by Dylan, especially in terms of language capabilities. I'm not talking about learning new language like English as the more common language for us now. I'm talking about the mother tongues, the local language that we all started with. I think that one of the frustration for many graduates about the education they got from universities or college is that they were not able to equip them with the selling points in the labor markets. When they apply for jobs, they were disappointed rather than accepted. Why? The very simple reason is that they cannot write a good resume. They cannot write a good some essays that the employers want to ask to know more about the applicants. So I think the writing skills is very important. So it's a surprising thing for me to see the one who graduated with high grades from the language programs are the most successful one. You can study physics or mathematics, or you can study political science or computer science. But I think that the course which is mandatory is the course on language studies. It helps you to write beautifully, it helps you to write persuasively, and it is really a tip for success. And in my university, even though before I joined the ambassadorship in Korea, I was a professor at the Diplomatic Academy. And I was also its president. And one of my priority asking my colleagues at the academy to put into the curriculum is one mandatory course on writing in the mother tongue language. So, I mean, Vietnamese. So I think that helps a lot. And this is one of the few things that we can do in order to help our students less frustrated after they graduate. The other tip is asking students to develop the problem-solving skills. And problems are everywhere. And I think that we have so many different things, but we had just one common thing we share. It is the problems. So we all have problems. And I think that the employers, the future employers would would want to find the applicants who have the problem solving capabilities. And problem solving means two things. One, the ability to identify the problems, and next then is the ability to solve the problems from his or her own perspective. And I don't think that we, in our standard educational programs in universities, have some courses, specific courses that has the level of problem solving. But in all the field of expertise, I think we would have this kind of problem solving perspective, either from the academic or from the practical perspectives. So in short, writing skills and problem solving skills are the two very important important topics that make you less frustrated after graduation.
I would just like to add to the ambassadors, so well spoken, and resonate with that. I focus a lot on what's happening as far as emerging technology. And as you look at, what's happening with artificial intelligence, computer technologies, what's going to be critical for us for the future is how can we be more human, right? And as he was talking about that communication, our language, understanding each other and our cultures, the empathy, the problem solving, the complex problem solving and creativity that we have, and that critical thinking is so important. Because as you look at how the future work, the future of education, as we look towards the future, things are going to continue to change, and it's going to get faster and faster. So the most critical thing is how we learn, how we relearn, how we continue to grow from that, how we communicate, engage with each other in that. So I just wanted to, commend the ambassador on his thoughts and resonate. So.
And by the way, those who are sitting in this discussion are really good at writing, because we read your essays and we are so impressed with that. And that's why you are chosen.
And what Ambassador Tung was saying in relation to what Dylan was saying, I think also presents like a really good, interesting juxtaposition between the role of education for cultural awareness and having more awareness of our place compared to the goals of education that helps train students for employability and the skills force. And when Jasmine, Mayte, and I were talking in preparation before this, we were talking a lot about the way that education has like helped shape our sense of identity, because I think it's something that's a lot more multifaceted than the ways in which we think. And so, for example, with my organization with Enspire, we're teaching English with students from marginalized population. And of course, English is something that's really important for skills development and the job force. But at the same time, it's something that has a lot to do with like the cultural aspects, including both like sensitivity towards our own culture and its interactions with Western. And so I think it's something really interesting to think about, especially moving forward with technology, how we navigate these different objectives of education, because for now, it seems like a lot of it is really focused around building the necessary credentials and the skill sets. And so I'd be curious to hear from all of, so particularly from Ms. Sahai, about the ways in which you see these different directions being formed within the educational technology space.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to direct questions to other cohort members, so you can go before I do that.
We definitely see the hopes is that when you look at kind of publishing and school books, it used to be, very centralized. It would take years for professors to get published. What is promising is now publishing timelines are a lot quicker. They're self-publishing it from that standpoint. And as Dylan was mentioning, if we look at the indigenous histories, the voices that have not been heard, the cultural diversity, I'm hopeful for the future that we'll now be able to have more voices be heard because of this openness to it, right? Before you'd only go to one publishing house, you'd have to get approved. Diverse authors were not approved, but now there's more diversity from that. My hopes now too, as we look at massive online courses, that there is diversity of course offerings. Because I agree with Dylan, there is so much insight, knowledge from our indigenous, from our cultural histories, from art, anthropology, sociology, religion, politics. And we only see a narrow slice from that. And I think the more we learn about that, and then what we think about the future, I have a concern as we start depending on computers for algorithms. What decisions are they going to make? What ethics and integrity are they following? How are we programming it? What data are we inputting it to have them learn? So as we kind of look toward the future, I think my future of education and how I see it is that it's not just a K through 12 or a college education. It's going to be continual education. We're going to have to retrain adults on new jobs for the future. When I was going to university, data scientists didn't exist. So I need to get retrained. And what does that mean? We now have quantum computing, cybersecurity, and there's so many things to be developed as we looked at nanotechnology. So I think the future of education will be continual. We're going to live to 120 years old. We're going to keep learning. We're going to learn more about our brain and the capacity of our brain and how it can grow from that standpoint and capability. So I'm optimistic, but also value how education will play in the future as well.
So as Ms. Sai mentioned, I think technology is one thing that we can, new chapter that we can have education on. And also it becomes a really good mean to, spread the knowledge as, Ms. Sai also works on, mentoring, women in VC. I'm pretty sure, these technology really did help to reach out to more individuals. And so I think Ms. Sai and Hwa actually mentioned about the role of education as well. So I wanted to expand these questions to Mark and Lloyd because I know they are foreigners who are living in Korea, and Korea has a very specific, atmosphere in education. For example, I think it is important for education to reach many goals, but sometimes it collides, as in Korea, it is mostly about job preparation, right? So everyone goes to college and most of the college directed to how do these people get to better jobs? So I kind of recognize that both Rohit and Mark are from countries that have really different, atmosphere from Korea. So it would be nice if you guys can share how you felt it was to have specific role of education, comparing your experiences.
I'll jump in. Thanks, Jasmine, for the question. I think this kind of touches on maybe Hwa's point about these sort of, diverse and even competing objectives or aims of education. And I guess for Korea, you talk about to sort of create workers that are ready for the market. Like that's sort of one very pragmatic objective. But then on the other hand, we were talking a lot about sort of cultural awareness and basically creating good citizens. And I think that's especially important, for primary and secondary education when you're growing up. I guess school is the place where you're spending most of your time. It's the ultimate sort of socializing institution for young people. So I guess, and if I think now to coming to Korea, like most of the point of coming was to sort of network and meet people from other places, and then that's the biggest thing about COVID, I think. Like, we talk about how there's been this huge shift to online learning, and there's so many new opportunities that have arisen out of this. But then at the same time, if this is how we're being socialized now online in Zoom, what does this mean? Like, I don't think it's sustainable. I mean, on a personal level, it's very annoying, but at the same time, I've had the opportunity to not have online schooling my whole life. But I think, for younger kids especially, I don't see how it's so sustainable. Yeah, so that's kind of like, yeah, my answer to this technology question. I see COVID as really opening up so many deeper contradictions, sort of exposing a lot of issues that were there latently, but now are a bit more explicit. So, yeah, over to Loic.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for the question, Jasmine. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you as well, His Excellency Tung and Her Excellency Ranganathan, Ms. Sahai, for your comments as well. For my insights and my experience, I think I'd like to touch upon access to education as well, and the solution to this, which for me also lies a bit in the private sector, understanding what the need is from companies hiring students, but also just the basic needs from, even for designing curriculums in the very young, for students at a very young age, which can sometimes be disconnected. So my experience relating to education, I think it's mainly like administering a tertiary education program in Uganda last year when COVID hit, and suddenly you had a problem of how to deliver your content to students with a huge disparity with this sudden online transition that really benefited those that had the means to have online access and those that didn't. And it's a gap that continues to happen for months. It was very difficult to find a solution. And I think one of the tracks that has been underused was one mentioned by Ms. Sahai right at first, was really to use these public-private partnerships a bit more, in the sense that some telecom operators, television channels, radio channels actually would have had the capacity and the interest to broadcast, education programs for kids of all ages, also for students further in their curriculum, but the disconnection between them and the education sector was big, and lots of valuable months of education were lost in that way. And the second, I think, where the private sector can help a lot is also just to design the curriculum. Now, this is a problem that has been addressed with relative success in Switzerland. From what I understand from my time here in Korea as well, is that companies also work a lot to understand to shape the program of universities. I think it's something that's really lacking in some countries where there's a huge mismatch between the students that are pushed to get a degree from a really good university that's seen as the best in the country, and they get anything for this one certificate that actually doesn't help them in practice in real life. It's just a signal, and they have to learn a new job, just as nearly anyone else without the certificate would. And it's both in a way quite inefficient and quite frustrating, especially when you need a bit of flexibility and a wide array of skills nowadays with fast changing employment dynamics and changing jobs. So that's something also we worked up on a lot. Was really actually, instead of thinking of how a program should look like, what does a graduate in engineering, data science, I don't know, linguistics, what should that person know? It would be instead to ask to the hiring companies, what are their needs actually? What are they looking for? And really trying to shape the education program in that sense. And I think it would lead to higher employability for the students, and also maybe more sustainability in education. Yeah, that's pretty much my insight. Thanks for your attention.
Yep.
I just wanted to add another 2 cents, because I think a lot of the discussion here today has been focused on what is the purpose of education, and also what does education actually look like. So we've talked a lot about, so on the first point, like what's the purpose of education? And then we've just heard from Mark and Luke about education as preparing for the workforce, or that's one view, a very pragmatic view, or cultivating global leaders. And we've also heard from Faye Sahai and others about what does education look like? Because, with the evolution of technology, AI, and machine learning, like how, and also like lynda.com or other online platforms, what are the diverse ways that people can learn? And I just wanted to like maybe put a prompt, or maybe I'd take it in a different direction, but thinking about like, if we take Mark's point on what's the purpose of education, and we think about it as cultivating global citizens and leaders who are ready to take on the world in a respectful, meaningful way. And then we consider how, and also Ms. Sahai's point earlier about like education as being lifelong and enduring, then I think we can also take a more holistic view of education as not necessarily just within our primary or high school curriculums, or even the degree that you do at uni, but also like holistically in terms of the architecture you interact with on a daily basis, or talking with the baker you have in the morning, or even just the advertisements that you have on the train. Because as a bit of context, I come from the position of someone who's working in cultural heritage, and really thinking about how we can disseminate education and cultural heritage on a wider basis, and not just like in didactic or 2 hours a week in a class. Because cultural heritage and by extension languages, it's not something you can learn easily, and it really requires that those touch points and reinforcement on a regular basis. So yeah, maybe as a prompt to the Ask Why fellows, also the other panelists, is like, what do you think of education in a holistic sense that unifies urban design, that unifies our institutions, which unifies even just, when I gave the example of architecture, I was thinking about in New Zealand, how they also have the significant public institutions there in Māori names and also English names. And also at the start of like the COVID announcements, because I don't know why I watch New Zealand when I'm in Australia, but they always start off with like a Māori greeting, and then they go straight into it. So even these like micro gestures are in some ways like forms of education, because they bring it into your consciousness and it's reinforcement. So yeah, that's my prompt to everyone. What do you think of education as a holistic approach? Thanks.
Well, I think that, well, for me at least, it's something that engages our communities a little bit more proactively. I think that among schools, I don't know these days, but before we had been doing like an educational project about different pedagogies that are being used in educational institutions, and particularly among the more active pedagogies and curriculums, you see a lot of community project-based pedagogies and just organization, so that the content that students are learning in the classrooms isn't just siloed within the school, but also reaches out to like the communities around us, which I think also just kind of goes back earlier about liberal arts education. Because for me, when I went to the US, something that I really valued a lot was the projects that we were doing where we would reach out to the people around us. And I think especially in the US, where the universities are very gated and it's very separated from the rest of the community, having that sort of interaction was something really meaningful. It's something that I'm also curious to hear about from Ambassador Ranganathan, because we had talked a bit earlier about the regional differences and how educational intervention programs can address that. Do you see any ways in which educational intervention programs look to include more of the community and, like what Dylan was saying, of the infrastructure beyond just educational objectives and schools in general? I don't know if that question made sense.
You want me to answer that, Jasmine, or you want to go around, finish everything, and I come in at the end?
Sure. I mean, I think Ms. Sahai also wanted to talk about the issues. So maybe after Ms. Sahai finished off the comment, Ambassador Ranganathan can answer the question. Yeah, and we can go around and finish up the today's session, I guess, due to the time.
No, I do think education needs to be outside the schools as well. We definitely see an increase in companies retraining their workforce and reskilling. You may have heard of Amazon actually even paying for people's education from this standpoint. I'm part of the Smithsonian Advisory Board, where we're looking at the museums and the research centers and saying, how can we help this contribute and add to the assets of education across the world from that standpoint? So I really do think there's an opportunity to think of education holistically as global citizens and a lifelong learning. And we have so much to learn from each other from that standpoint. Whether it's, as you mentioned, at this acknowledgement on the sports field of the land that you're on, as you mentioned, just even introducing yourself here as well, whether it's at a school, your new job, a community center, your temple. I think there's wonderful ways that education can filtrate from that. So
I think that I can join the discussion here from my own experience. You know that being called a good student in the context of Vietnam means that you have to go to the class. You do not have the right to play truant, and you have to get high grades. And I think that's wrong, like 51% wrong, because I heard many among us saying that studying education is not in the classroom, is not in the universities, is elsewhere. But even in the context of a physical classroom or physical universities, we have other source of knowledge, both intellectual, academic, and practical, and the students can teach each other really well. So instead of staying in the classroom listening to the professors, just interact with other students and you learn a lot from there. And this is where you can raise the social awareness, you build the network and build the solidarity, as well as whatever you can learn from the friends. Again, so locking in the library or in the classroom, which I did, was wrong. Okay, number one. Number two, aiming for high grades is also wrong, because it's learning is okay, but it doesn't mean that you have to be earning high grades in order to show that you are learning. So you can have not really good grades, but you can learn from the mistake, the lessons. I mean, the test you fail, you remember more than the test you got high grades, and that would be something that I can share with you from my own experience. So when I went to the US for my master's and PhD degrees, and I was acting like a good student in the East Asian context, and I was having so many problems, and these problems also I see it more clearly. This problem stems from the two approaches. One, stick in the classroom, and two, earn the high grades, and that was not really effective, especially these days, and especially in the more liberal academic and educational settings. So I think this is what I can share with you from my own experience, and I hope that it can help. Yes.
Thank you, Ambassador. I wanted to add something as well. I think as empowering as education can be, especially for like somebody coming from like a lower socioeconomic background, I think it can, especially when it comes to basic education, it can also be very restricting, which is why I think Dylan's point of having this holistic approach to education is really important, and that education should be like outside the classroom as well. I think like it took me, especially in high school, like I'm not sure if it's the same for other countries, but in Sri Lanka, we have a very like rote learning, like it's based on repetition. And so it definitely did kill like a lot of my creative instincts and kind of going back to forming an identity. I think it took me like 4 years of college to actually like unlearn most of these influences that I've had throughout my high school life. And some of the biases, some of the prejudices that I had to like unlearn all of that. And college did help. And not only college, I think that whole experience and whatever kind of comes along with that, like studying in a different country, talking to people from different diverse cultures, that really helped to kind of help me explore both my identity and I think to be more understanding and empathetic towards other people. And I think I also kind of can relate to what Ambassador Tung said about like, you know, your marks and your achievements being kind of based on your marks. I think for the most part in my life, like I've actually kind of valued myself based on like my academic achievements. So there were like, you know, a lot of fluctuation when it comes to like self-esteem, self-worth and things like that. So it really helped me like kind of coming out of this shell to see that, you know, it's not like having these academic achievements is not the only thing that kind of values a person. And so I think it's really important that not only in basic education, but also outside of the classroom that we kind of teach students that, you know, there's a lot of generalization going on and that that needs to be taken into consideration when kind of building like in the developmental stages of like a person's life, which is like, I guess, being a student, to kind of realize their potential and to kind of be able to face the challenges that they have. So yes, that's what I wanted to kind of add on to the topic as well.
I did want to say, just even with all of you here and involved with, you know, the Asia Society from that standpoint, I think this is such a rich learning that's outside the classroom, and just kind of a wonderful example of that, whether it's your program experience here, meeting each other and being with these amazing ambassadors, sharing their wisdom with you, to internships, because when we look at kind of learning, right? You can learn it from traditional education. You can learn it from experience, such as your experience here. You can learn it from exposure, as you were saying, like study abroad, meet other people, talk to others, acknowledgements from that. So if you look at it as you continue to grow and evolve and kind of mature from that, education's only one rung of your learning experience. That exposure what you learn, what you experience in the world, that real life experience are going to be so important as well. And as the ambassador was saying, you know, as you go older into your career, I don't remember my GPA. Right. So I'll have to look it up. I have to look at the transcript. So I know right now it is so critical. You feel it does kind of help you with the steps of your ladder. But if you look at the trajectory of kind of your lifetime and your career, it diminishes in that. So remember, in your journey of education, it's not just about getting that grade, the learning, your experience, being able to, appreciate from that, to not burn yourself out. I've been focused a lot on what I've seen is a lot of student burnout, as well. It's like, how can you have that whole wellness to not only learn to excel in your career, but learn how to take care of yourself, to be, as you're mentioning, empathetic to others, to have that communication and engagement, to build that network of amazing people like that you have all here. I hope that you all keep in touch with each other, because something that they didn't tell me, you know, and I wish I had known earlier in my career, is it is all about your people, you know, who know you, keeping in contact with them and that sense of connection. The biggest part of your longevity, your happiness, your sense of purpose is that connection. We're all human beings. We're all social beings from that. So that connection is important in education. And I think, as an ambassador is saying, learn from your fellow peers as well. So I just wanted to reinforce that of, you know, when you're later on, you won't remember what your GPA is. You might remember that horrible teacher and that one grade and that one experience. But like, do I remember my GPA from all my different schools? No. So just to frame that, then just don't think it's the end of the world if you do get a bad grade in something.
Can I raise a point here? I think that to think education as comprehensive or as something liberal, you must face with a very real challenge, which is your parents. They want you to follow their successful path. They want you to finish to complete their dreams. Sometimes they are right, but not all the time. So I think I see you nodding. And I think that is really important, because it can be very personal here. The parents have all the right to be concerned about what you are going to be, and they are having so many experience, and they really want to share, and they don't want you to fail. But at some point, you have to be really independent in making the decisions, and making the decisions can be working both ways. Sometimes you can be not successful, and sometimes you are successful. And sometimes mistakes cannot be redone. But anyway, we have this situation that we have to talk in a very serious way with your parents, what you want to really do. And I think that is really difficult. And think about any thing that resemblance to this kind of discussion you have at home, especially when you decide to enroll in the university, or you want to take the majors that you really like, but that might not be coinciding with what the parents like. So think about that.
Let me also just jump in over here very briefly to, in a way, share with you that this is again a kind of perspective that evolves over time, and you're all at a very, very, you're just starting your journey into education and into whatever may be the path that you embark upon in the future. But I think one real truth of what we have all experienced is that there is education and there is life. And sometimes the connection between the two is not as direct as we would imagine when you are, again, at the stage of life that you are at. But I have certainly seen that education is truly a continual process. And I think this is a point which Ms. Sahai has made repeatedly in the course of her various interventions today. And that is that what you learn in university and what you have experienced in university perhaps just gives you that initial opening and gives you that perspective to grasp and to grow on the basis of what life throws at you. But there is no direct correlation with whatever it is, whatever is the path that you have embarked upon at this stage of life in your university, in whatever may be the next degree program that you decide to enroll or not enroll. Again, as Ambassador Tung has mentioned, Asian parents traditionally have assigned a lot of importance to conventional courses and programs of study. They may not be what is important and what is right for you. So feel bold enough to grasp for whatever it is that is in tune with your inclination and your mindset. I have a senior at school at home right now, and I see what she is going through in terms of managing her stress levels at school, managing her application processes. And truly, I mean, I am so much in awe with what all of you have gone through, because I could not write even today the kind of applications that you guys have and girls have written to get to wherever you are right now. So I think we lived in gentler times. We had it much easier in terms of both managing the expectations of our families and managing the expectations of the universities. I think you guys are truly amazing in terms of what you have to put forward to be able to even enroll for some of these courses. But again, it's just there is a whole life out there. So as Ambassador Tung puts it, it's not just the GPAs, it's not just the grades that you get, it's the friendships that you forge and the networks that you're able to form. And that is certainly something that I have perceived very clearly in the past 27 years plus of my career till date, that the grades are there and the grades are important, but the grades are not everything.
Thank you. And I think as we wrap up what Ambassador Ranganathan, Ambassador Ms. Sahai all have said, a common theme that has come up throughout the conversation today has been about the holistic and the personal aspects of education and thinking more comprehensively about that moving forward. And I think that's something that's really important to keep in mind as we look to the sustainability of education and how education can contribute to sustainability as well. Everyone for these really insightful comments.
Okay, thanks, Hwa. I'm going to take over now. So thanks again, Mayte, Jasmine, and Hwa for organizing and leading today's discussion. I'm going to echo what Ambassador Tung mentioned about the parents, Korean parents, when their little children are being brats, and then they'll get really angry and tell them, I hope that you're going to have the children just like yourself when you get older. But then they turn out okay. I mean, look at yourselves. So Ambassador Tung, Ambassador Ranganathan, are you proud that you selected this 10 wonderful cohorts this year?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, you must be patting yourselves in the back. And Faye, thank you. So I know that this is the first time we're having you with us at HSA, this Korea Center, but we're so happy that you agreed to join us, and we very much enjoyed having you and hope that you will come back and join us for another time.
It was an honor and pleasure, very humbled to be here and happy to help in whatever way I can.
Thank you for having me. And actually, I learned a lot from the discussion. It's really like Mr. Hai saying, it's like continuous and never-ending education, at least for me in this section. Thank you.
And we have somebody who's been very quietly observing everyone, Caitlin Magtodo, joining us from Philippines. Caitlin, would you like to just briefly say hello?
Hi, everyone. It's very nice to meet you all, meet you all. A very insightful discussion. It was a pleasure listening to all of your comments and insights.
Thanks, Kaylin, and I really hope that we will be able to collaborate on more programs with your center going forward. So thank you again, Your Excellency Tung, Your Excellency Ranganathan, and Ms. Faye Sahai for making the time in your busy schedule to join us today. And our 10 cohorts, you guys were awesome as always, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Lovely meeting you all and having this conversation.
Bye. Take care.